Damascus, Syria, February 12, 2008, 10:47 p.m. A silver Mitsubishi Pajero pulled away from the curb on Mazet Boulevard. Inside, the target, Imad Mughniyeh. A quick tweak to the mirror, a slow scan behind. All quiet. The evening meeting with Syrian intelligence had run long, but that was normal. His bodyguards had checked the vehicle twice that day, once in the morning, once before the meeting. They'd inspected under the chassis, examined the engine, swept for tracking devices. Everything was clear. 3,000 miles away, in a secure facility, multiple pairs of eyes watched a screen. Someone's finger hovered over a button. They'd been waiting for this exact moment for 1,247 days. They'd come close 32 times before. 32 times they'd pulled back at the last second, a child appearing next to the target, a pedestrian walking too close, a bodyguard lingering near the vehicle. Tonight, finally, Mughniyeh was alone. The finger pressed down. The explosion tore through the Damascus night. Fire erupted from the rear of the Pajero, the blast so precisely calibrated that it destroyed everything within the vehicle while leaving the cars parked nearby virtually untouched. But the man they found slumped in the driver's seat, the ghost who had evaded capture for 30 years, would never answer another question. This single moment represented the culmination of 3 decades of hunting. But the story of how Israeli intelligence finally caught the uncatchable begins not with an explosion, but with a funeral and a mistake that would prove fatal. Rewind 4 years. July 2004. Southern Beirut. The Mossad had just eliminated Ghaleb Awali, a senior Hezbollah commander responsible for coordinating attacks against Israeli forces. They knew his funeral would draw high-ranking Hezbollah operatives, possibly even their most wanted target, Imad Mughniyeh. Israeli agents positioned themselves around the cemetery, cameras ready, faces memorized from their single decades-old photograph of the elusive terrorist. Mughniyeh never showed. Too careful, too paranoid. His own brother had been killed by the Mossad in 1995, and Mughniyeh hadn't attended that funeral either. He understood that moments of grief were moments of vulnerability, and he refused to be vulnerable. But Hezbollah's propaganda department didn't share his caution. They filmed a memorial video for Awali, a touching tribute that included footage from various Hezbollah events and gatherings. The film was meant for internal distribution, a way to memorialize a fallen commander and inspire the rank and file. They never imagined it would end up in Israeli hands. Israeli intelligence obtained the video through a network of informants operating in Lebanon. The footage was immediately transferred to a specialized unit within the Mossad, analysts trained to extract intelligence from visual media. They worked in a facility where the lights never fully went out, where teams rotated in 8-hour shifts, examining every frame of every piece of footage that came across their desks. One analyst working the late shift was reviewing the Awali memorial for the 3rd time. Standard procedure called for multiple viewings by different analysts. His eyes were tired. He'd been staring at screens for 6 hours. But then something made him pause. He rewound 15 seconds. Watched again. His hand reached for the phone. Standing next to Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General, was a man whose face matched a photograph that had been circulated throughout Israeli intelligence for over 2 decades. The image was grainy, shot from a distance, but the facial recognition software gave it an 87% probability match. They brought in 2 more analysts, then a supervisor, then the head of the department. It was him, Imad Mughniyeh, in the flesh, the first confirmed sighting in over 20 years. The implications were staggering. If Mughniyeh was comfortable enough to appear on camera standing next to Nasrallah, he was operating in Lebanon, probably Beirut. The working assumption had always been that he moved between Iran and Syria, staying in places where Israeli intelligence had limited reach. But Lebanon? That was different. The Mossad had deep networks in Lebanon. They could work there. Except there was a problem. Despite having operatives in Lebanon, Despite the networks and the informants and the technological capabilities, despite knowing what he looked like now, they still couldn't find him. Months passed. The Mossad deployed additional resources. They tracked known Hezbollah operatives, hoping one would lead them to Mughniyeh. They monitored communications. They analyzed travel patterns. Nothing. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. The year was 2006, and Israeli cyber warfare units had been working on penetrating Iranian government networks for years. Iran maintained extensive files on its various proxy organizations and allied groups throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah, being one of Iran's most important assets, was well documented in these systems. The Iranians tracked funding, operations, personnel movements. They knew where their key people were at all times. The penetration of the Iranian system was a masterwork of patient intelligence gathering. It didn't happen overnight. Israeli cyber specialists had identified vulnerabilities in the Iranian network architecture, planted backdoors, established persistent access points that could survive system updates and security sweeps. They'd been inside the Iranian system for months before they even began looking for Mughniyeh's file. When they found it, the information was gold. Mughniyeh had relocated to Damascus in 2006. He was living under an assumed identity, with documentation provided by Syrian intelligence. The Syrians knew exactly who he was and had assigned him a security detail. He lived in a villa in the Kafr Sousa district, a neighborhood known for housing intelligence personnel and regime officials. The Mossad now had a location. They had a current photograph. They had confirmation that their target was alive and active. But they also had a massive problem. Syria was what intelligence agencies call a target country, an enemy state where operations carry extreme risk. Syrian intelligence was sophisticated, well-funded, and paranoid. They assumed Israeli spies were trying to operate in Damascus, and they devoted considerable resources to catching them. Getting Israeli agents into Syria for scouting missions would be incredibly dangerous. The Syrians would be watching for exactly that kind of activity. Travel patterns would be monitored. Hotels would be under surveillance. Any foreigner showing interest in sensitive neighborhoods would be flagged. And if an Israeli agent was caught in Syria, the consequences didn't bear thinking about. The Syrians had a well-earned reputation for brutality in their interrogation facilities. This led to one of the most unusual decisions in Mossad history. They decided to ask for American help. The request went through carefully established channels, intelligence liaison officers who'd spent years building relationships between the agencies. The initial approach was delicate. The Israelis didn't immediately reveal who the target was or where he was located. They simply indicated they had a high-value target in a location where Israeli operations were particularly difficult, and they needed American assistance. The CIA was intrigued but cautious. The agency had strict guidelines about operations in countries where the United States maintained diplomatic relations. Syria, despite being problematic, wasn't officially at war with America. Carrying out an assassination on Syrian soil would be a clear violation of sovereignty, potentially creating a diplomatic crisis. But then the Israelis revealed the target's identity. Imad Mughniyeh. The name changed everything. Mughniyeh wasn't just an Israeli problem. He had American blood on his hands going back decades. The 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241 servicemen. The kidnapping and torture of CIA Station Chief William Buckley. The hijacking of TWA Flight 847, during which a U.S. Navy diver was murdered and his body dumped on the tarmac. More recently, intelligence indicated Mughniyeh was coordinating operations in Iraq, sending fighters and expertise to kill American soldiers. The CIA wanted him dead, but they had conditions. First, the operation had to be surgical. The target was Mughniyeh and only Mughniyeh. No collateral damage. If anyone else was at risk, the operation would be canceled. The Israelis agreed to this immediately. They had no interest in killing Syrian civilians or causing an international incident. Second, the Americans would provide support, intelligence, and reconnaissance, but the Israelis would carry out the actual assassination. This was about plausible deniability. If the operation was exposed, it needed to be traceable to Israel, not the United States. The Israelis agreed to this as well. With the partnership established, American intelligence officers began arriving in Damascus. They came as businessmen, academics, aid workers, all with carefully constructed cover identities that would withstand Syrian scrutiny. Their mission was simple: find Mughniyeh's patterns, identify his vulnerabilities, map his movements. It took weeks of careful surveillance, but gradually a picture emerged. Mughniyeh was cautious, almost obsessively so, but he had a weakness. Syrian intelligence, as a courtesy to their important guest, had provided him with female companions. 3 women housed in different apartments across Damascus, whom Mughniyeh would visit on a rotating schedule. Here's where his operational security broke down. When visiting these women, Mughniyeh went alone. No bodyguards, no security detail, just him and his silver Mitsubishi Pajero. He believed the locations were secret, that no one knew about these visits. Syrian intelligence had arranged everything quietly. What could be safer? This was the opening they needed. American surveillance teams began tracking these trips, documenting routes, timing the visits, identifying patterns. They photographed the vehicle from every angle, noting its distinctive features. They mapped the streets around each apartment, identifying potential locations for the operation. Meanwhile, Israeli planners were working on the weapon. It needed to be powerful enough to ensure the target's elimination, but precise enough to avoid killing bystanders. It needed to be small enough to hide in a vehicle, but reliable enough to function after sitting dormant for weeks or even months. It needed to be remotely detonated, which meant it required a triggering mechanism that would work from a distance and could not be accidentally activated. The solution was elegant: a shaped charge, precisely engineered to direct the blast inward toward the driver's seat while minimizing the outward explosion. Small enough to fit inside the spare tire compartment in the rear of the Pajero. Powerful enough to be absolutely lethal to anyone in the vehicle. The detonator would be triggered by a radio signal, allowing operatives to choose the exact moment of activation from a safe distance. But getting the device into position presented its own challenge. Mughniyeh's bodyguards checked his vehicle regularly. They looked under the chassis. They examined the engine compartment. They swept for tracking devices and listening equipment. But they had a blind spot: the spare tire compartment. Why didn't they check there? Probably because it seemed too obvious, too simple. Surely no intelligence service would try something so straightforward. It was also awkward to access, requiring the removal of interior panels and cargo area components. The bodyguards checked the easy access points and assumed that was sufficient. For months, surveillance continued. American and Israeli operatives worked in shifts, maintaining constant awareness of Mughniyeh's location. They knew which apartment he was visiting on any given night. They knew his routes. They knew how long he typically stayed. All they needed was the right window of opportunity to swap out the spare tire cover. The moment came on a quiet evening when Mughniyeh was inside one of the apartments for what surveillance suggested would be an extended visit. The street was dark. Syrian intelligence maintained a light presence in the neighborhood, enough to deter casual criminals, but not so heavy as to draw attention to the fact that someone important lived there. A commercial vehicle pulled up near the Pajero. 2 men emerged, dressed as maintenance workers. They had tools. They moved with purpose, but without rushing. In less than 6 minutes, they had removed the original spare tire cover and replaced it with an identical-looking unit that contained the shaped charge. They tested the detonator signal. Everything worked. They were gone before Mughniyeh finished his visit. Now came the hardest part: waiting for the perfect moment. The rules of engagement were absolute. Mughniyeh had to be alone. No one else could be at risk. The operators monitoring the situation had to have clear confirmation that the target was in the vehicle and no one else was nearby. Over the following weeks, they came close 32 times. 32 separate occasions when everything seemed aligned, when Mughniyeh was in the vehicle, when the finger moved toward the detonation button. And 32 times, something happened at the last second that caused them to abort. Once, one of Mughniyeh's children unexpectedly got into the car. Abort. Twice, pedestrians walked too close to the vehicle just as Mughniyeh was opening the door. Abort. Several times, one of his bodyguards lingered near the car longer than expected, waiting to confirm Mughniyeh was safely away. Abort. Each aborted operation raised the risk of discovery. Every day the device remained in the vehicle was another day the bodyguards might decide to do a more thorough inspection. Every day was another chance that Syrian intelligence might detect the surveillance teams. Every day increased the possibility that Mughniyeh would change his patterns, abandon the vehicle, disappear again. The operational stress was immense. The team members monitoring the surveillance feeds worked in a state of constant tension. They'd spent years hunting this target. They had him in their sights. They had the weapon in place, and yet they couldn't pull the trigger because of circumstances beyond their control. February 12, 2008, started like many other days. Mughniyeh attended a meeting with Syrian intelligence officials and Hezbollah leadership. The meeting ran longer than expected, stretching into the evening. When it finally concluded, the surveillance team watched as the participants began to leave. Mughniyeh emerged from the building alone. He walked to his Pajero without his usual security detail. The street was clear. No pedestrians nearby. No other vehicles pulling out at the same time. The surveillance team confirmed visual contact. The target was approaching the vehicle. He was alone. The decision was made. After 1,247 days of searching, after 32 aborted attempts, after decades of pursuit, this was the moment. Mughniyeh opened the door of the Pajero. He settled into the driver's seat. He checked his mirrors one final time, a habit so ingrained he probably didn't even think about it anymore. The signal transmitted. The shaped charge detonated. The explosion was precisely calibrated, powerful enough to be instantly fatal, but contained enough to minimize damage beyond the immediate target. The rear of the vehicle erupted in flame. The concussive force shattered windows in nearby buildings but left the structures themselves intact. Syrian emergency services arrived within minutes. They found Mughniyeh's body still in the driver's seat. There was no question about the cause of death. This was an assassination, professionally executed, leaving no doubt about the intention. Within hours, Hezbollah confirmed that Mughniyeh was dead. Hassan Nasrallah delivered a speech promising revenge, calling Mughniyeh a martyr and vowing that his death would not go unanswered. The organization launched an immediate investigation, trying to determine how Israeli intelligence had located their second-in-command and executed him in the heart of Damascus. The revelation that the explosive device had been hidden in the spare tire compartment for weeks shocked Hezbollah's security apparatus. It meant Israeli agents had physical access to Mughniyeh's vehicle. It meant their security protocols had failed catastrophically. It meant that if the Israelis could reach Mughniyeh in Damascus, protected by Syrian intelligence, no one in Hezbollah's leadership was truly safe. For Israeli intelligence, the operation represented a long-awaited triumph after 3 decades of failure. Mughniyeh had been responsible for more Israeli deaths than almost any other terrorist. He'd pioneered tactics that other groups would copy for years. He'd been the ghost they couldn't catch, the target who always stayed one step ahead. The cooperation between the Mossad and CIA on the operation remained classified for years. When details finally emerged, they revealed the extent of the collaboration. American intelligence had provided crucial support, from the initial surveillance that identified Mughniyeh's patterns to the real-time monitoring that confirmed the final strike. Israeli technical expertise had created the weapon and executed the operation. It was a partnership born of shared interests and mutual respect between intelligence services that understood the value of patience and precision. The assassination sent shockwaves through the world of international terrorism. If Mughniyeh, with all his experience and paranoia and security measures, could be eliminated, what did that say about the reach of Western intelligence agencies? The message was clear. There is no safe haven, no perfect security, no escape from consequences. One target, one moment, one precisely calibrated explosion that ended the career of a man who thought he was untouchable. The ghost was gone, exorcised by intelligence services that proved themselves more patient, more determined, and more capable than their adversary ever imagined possible.